So, Peter, where are you from originally?
Epsom, as in Epsom salts.
Yeah, where is Epsom?
It's in the county of Surrey, as in the fringe on top. All right. It used to be a spa town, but once they discovered that the spa water was only dissolved magnesium sulfate and you could make that in a factory, they switched to horse racing, and that's where the English Derby is run.
When did you know or discover that electricity was the thing?
At 5 years old, my first school concert, I can remember my mother saying to me, "Why weren't you looking out front like all the other boys and girls? Why were you looking up at the lights?" I got involved in a small drama club when I was 13, and there I was having to actually make whatever equipment we needed out of coffee cans. I even made my own dimmers, which were lethal. Well, not quite, because I'm still here, but
Right.
and there were people in that drama group who got me involved in a higher level of community theatre. I found myself, technical director for a festival of 18 one-act plays for Surrey villages at the age of 17.
Wow.
Teaches you a hell of a lot about logistics.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to put 18 plays on in 6 nights, bang, 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 bang. So after that, I joined BBC Television, and I was there for about 3 years. Fortunately, got onto a studio crew that was dealing with the arts more than, God forbid, I got onto the one dealing with sports. Was in on the first televised production of Waiting for Godot. We didn't understand a word of it. I didn't understand it until the Rogue did it. And then I suppose the next leap was that I had written to a theatre lighting design company in London, in fact the only one at the time, run by a guy named Richard Pilbrow. And I didn't expect to hear anything back. And then suddenly, out of the blue, I got a letter asking me to go in for an interview. They were co-producing the London production of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. And the designer, Tony Walton, had designed a whole series of backdrops which lent themselves to full-scale scenic projection, which was relatively new. And they wanted 2 people to basically be machine minders for these scenic projectors during the performance. Now we're talking a projector which is slightly larger than the average dog kennel, huge device, 5,000 watts. So that was interesting, but of course during the day we had to be occupied on other stuff. So on the flip of a coin, my buddy went to work with Richard's assistant on other shows, and I went to work with him on the opening of the National Theatre. Most memorable session was running a lighting rehearsal with Richard Pilbrow, the designer, on one side, and Lawrence Olivier working on this side. And we were going through queue to queue.
Olivier was directing.
He was director. He was actually director of the whole National Theatre Company, but he was director of Hamlet, the opening show, of course, Hamlet. So the set revolved one more time, and we got to Gertrude's bedroom scene. And there was this bed with this huge bed cover, which was all blacks and greys and purples, very Scandinavian. I suddenly realised why we had hung this special, which had this deep purple gel in it. So Richard calls up the circuit number, bring it up to full, and up it comes, and it hits the bed cover, pow, in the middle, and the whole set suddenly looks like a million kroner. Larry, instead of saying, "Richard, that looks wonderful," says, "Wow, that was a bit of luck." So for the next half hour, they weren't talking to each other, only through me. It was actually ridiculous. I was passing messages between them. Anyway, I moved on after that to architectural lighting, but I was doing theatre the whole time in the background. Was technical director for a purpose-built 200-seat theatre in Leamington Spa in England called the Loft Theatre. They put on 9 full-scale productions a year.
That's a lot.
It certainly was. That kept me busy.
Yeah, no doubt.
Then I moved to the States. Still did a bit of theatre, and then when I retired to Tucson, 2004, and then I suddenly discovered there was this company called the Rogue Theatre, and I saw some of their early productions. I saw The Goat, I saw The Cherry Orchard, and then I found out about a fundraiser that they were having in the space that the Rogue is now in, and they'd got as far as putting up the grid and the black curtains. The Master of Ceremonies, of course, was Joe, and at one point he asked, "Does anyone know anything about hanging lights?" And like a fool, I put my hand up.
Oh, Peter, what were you thinking?
I actually stayed with the first season for about 3 or 4 productions. I didn't come back until Don Fox arrived in Tucson. Don, of course, is one of our lighting designers who unfortunately has now moved back to straight to Washington. And I knew him because he'd been working with me at the Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation on event lighting. He called me, one of his professors that he just lit a show for at U of A, David Morden. David had asked him if he would come to the Rogue to light his production of Measure for Measure. Did I know anything about the Rogue? I said, "Oh yeah, I know a lot about the Rogue," because I'd been coming to some of the shows. And he said, "Well, would you come and advise me? You won't have to do anything like climb ladders." So 10 years later, he's gone and I'm still climbing ladders. Something wrong there. And then all hell broke loose because Rogue's resident lighting guy suddenly upped and moved to California. So we suddenly were faced with lighting the entire season with a lighting setup that was less than satisfactory. The productions, besides Measure for Measure, included Arcadia, the first show where we had to use a cyc and where we found out we didn't have any cyc lighting equipment. Halfway through, we basically said this cannot go on because it was taking us 1 hour to hang, power up and focus each light. The setup wasn't right for a black box theatre. So we went to Joe and said, we can improve this for $5,500. Now, halfway through the season, he really didn't know much about Peter Bleasby or Don Fox, so he kind of choked on that and said, "Well, think about it, but we know we've got to do something." So by the end of the season, all systems go. We basically cleared everything off the floor and pulled in a scissor lift and basically put about 3,000 feet of extension cord into the roof and relocated all the dimmers. Since when, of course, it's grown to be much larger than that, but that was the initial setup.
Yeah.
So it made the following season a lot easier.
I want to back up on a couple of things.
Sure.
Your career was primarily in architectural lighting?
From my early 20s until I retired, yes.
Yeah, and what does that mean?
Any other kind of lighting other than entertainment lighting, basically.
Right.
The last 15 years in the US, I was chairman of the US Light Bulb Manufacturers Committee in Washington, D.C. And my principal job was to deal with government policy. And the reason that my colleagues at like General Electric and Philips and Duratest and companies like that kept voting me into the chair position was that they said that my accent intimidated federal officials.
What have been some of the more challenging plays or projects?
Every play has its own challenges. Great Expectations was quite a challenge. Midsummer Night's Dream was. But they all go through the same planning process, which the audience doesn't see. In fact, our theatre directors don't see. Now, I'm going to go to a crib sheet here.
Yeah.
Which is a document that I prepared a few years ago, and it gives 32 steps in lighting design. I promise I won't go through 32. No. But it just shows what the lighting designer is responsible for, what the master electrician is responsible for, what the theatre staff is responsible for, and even gets down to who buys the pizza for the hang crew.
And this is something you standardized for us, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The first thing that happens is that working with the lighting designer, you have to find a crew to come in on the Saturday before the open talk and rearrange all our lights. We usually get a mixture of our own staff who know what they're doing and 4 or 5 people from either from U of A or alumni, and they come in and they just go at it, and they're done in about 6 hours, even for the most complex show, which is a far removed from 1 hour per instrument that we started with. So this is a plan of the whole of the Rogue Theatre. It shows here 1E, 2E, 3, 4. Those are the electrics where all the lights hang. And ghosted in, you can see the seats for this particular configuration, and you can see the outline of the set. And then bolded, there's the lighting instruments, and we'll just go on to 5 electric and unit 1 here, which tells me that it's a medium flood lens. That R3314 number is the colour that Josh has already selected, and 10 is the channel number by which he's going to control that light. These 2 symbols here, the hexagon and the triangle, are blank. I have to fill those in by figuring out that this is going to plug into circuit 5H. I also have figured out that 5H is going to plug into dimmer 151. So I do that for all 100 or more instruments. All this has to be worked out beforehand, and I put it into a schedule and send it back to lighting designers. They put it into the software, and everything comes back to me all beautifully printed. So that when the hang crew comes in on that Saturday, there is the plot printed full size, all the schedules. Shannon Wallace usually directs operations on who goes up which ladder and hangs what where. I run around and make sure that everybody's got everything they need in order to put up that light and make it work. So you're basically like painting a picture, but with like brushstroke.
You are our one staff member whose services are entirely volunteered. Your contribution has been an enormous boon to the proficiency and health and growth of the theater.
Thank you.
Why give us that incredible gift?
I enjoy doing it. I'm retired. I need to be occupied.
Yeah.
Well, I've always enjoyed doing theatre lighting, so
yeah.
I guess I could wallow in it. The Rogue obviously does plays that are extremely worth doing, and it does them extremely well, whether they are Shakespeare or something that's been written last year, or adapted by Cindy or somebody.
What would the Rogue do without Peter Bleasby?
Well, I'd have to hire somebody.
Is there anything else that you would like to talk about, or that our audience should know about you, or what you do, or your relationship to the Rogue?
I think they'll know a terrifying amount after today.
Great.